Okay, it's a couple of minutes past the hour, so let's make a start. Welcome everybody. Good evening, good morning, depending on where in the world you are. Welcome again to another seminar in the series supported jointly by SPIPA, the Strategic Partnership Implementation of the Paris Agreement, and Melbourne Climate Futures from the University of Melbourne. My name is Peter Rayner, and I'm kind of the Australian lead for this project. Most of you will have seen that we've been kind of looking at a range of problems and solutions that are thrown up by climate change, but we've only a couple of times talked about the way people might actually interact with those solutions, the way people might drive those solutions. And clearly, climate change is an intergenerational problem, so it's really important that we think about what the voices of the next generation might say and what they might drive to make sure that their aspirations and their voices can help drive what those solutions look like. So it's really spectacular to be able to welcome two people working in that space this evening. So the seminar is going to be jointly presented by Alison Fong. Alison's a planner, trained at the University of Melbourne, and has been working for a while across a range of sustainability activities, including for the Global Covenant of Mayors. And the other presenter, who's actually going to be presenting by video, given the time zone difficulties of presenting from Bolivia, is Paula Flores Carvajal. Paula is trained as an engineer, but again has been working around the sustainability space and the kind of community NGO space with particular thoughts around climate and sustainability, including being things like the Latin American representative for things like the Global Youth Energy Outlook. So really well-placed voices to think about and help us think about how this problem is going to interact generationally, and how people from future generations, upcoming generations, can really help to drive solutions to this problem. So hand over first to Alison, and then we'll be joined kind of remotely by Paula later in the evening. So Alison, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. Good evening, everyone. I'll just share my screen. I'm hoping you all can see a PowerPoint. Yep, okay. So before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the lands on which I'm speaking today as traditional and ceded territory of the Wurundjeri people. I pay respects to the elders of the Kulin Nation, both past and present. I also extend my respects to all First Nations cultures and countries where you may be tuning in from tonight or this morning. So hello, everyone. My name is Alison. So like Peter said, I am currently a strategic planner, but also was once a student from the University of Melbourne. And whilst I was a student last year, I was honored to be able to have joined the Youth Policy Innovation team that was assembled under the partnership of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate Change and Energy, Student Energy, and then also the Melbourne Centre for Cities. So on behalf of Paula, who unfortunately wasn't able to attend tonight, we would like to thank the Climate and Energy College for having us tonight to be able to host this seminar, where we will be sharing some key insights from our analysis on Student Energy's Global Youth Energy Outlook datasets, and then also along the way highlight some of the importance of social data, best practices for intergenerational collaboration, and how to support youth-led action. So just a little bit about Student Energy. Student Energy is a global organization working to build the next generation of energy leaders. Currently, they work with a network of over 50,000 youths from across 120 countries who are all leading that transition towards a sustainable and equitable energy future. To support this work, they've collaborated with a wide range of different actors within the energy sector, including governments, companies, and organizations. And all of that work has been helpful in facilitating that meaningful youth engagement and also to mobilize resources in support of youth-led energy solutions. So Student Energy began as an idea between 3 young people in Canada. who felt that there wasn't really enough opportunities or spaces for young people to have a say in their energy futures. So this led to that very first International Student Energy Summit. And then from there, a movement began, and the organization was able to build out more programs and opportunities, all inspired by the passion and ambition of young people. So at the moment, this is just sort of like a visual guide to sort of share with you how Student Energy at the moment is actually the largest youth-led global energy organization. They have 47 chapters across 26 countries. They also have 28 full-time staff, and it continues to grow to this day. The main sort of thing or theory that they operate under is what they call the theory of change. So it's sort of building agents of change who will be actors in accelerating the energy transition. And so they've, as I mentioned before, they've done summits, different programs, and they've also been able to partner with different government and industry organizations as well. So this is sort of like the highlight for tonight that we'll be sharing. So the Global Youth Energy Outlook is one of the first youth-led research projects of its kind to engage over 40,000 young people ages 18 to 30 across 180 countries and territories. And this outlook helps sort of share their perspectives on the energy transition and climate action. It's led by a team of 12 regional coordinators who worked to engage with youth in their respective regions. And so the Outlook consists of a questionnaire that was translated into multiple languages to expand reach, as well as regional dialogues that were hosted by the regional coordinators. So these dialogues engaged young people on energy issues prevalent in their regions, and overall the Outlook aimed to answer what actions young people want to see happen to deliver a sustainable energy transition by 2030, and how do people want to be part of energy solutions needed for this transition. So as part of the Youth Innovation Policy team, we helped to kind of clean up and analyze the data from the questionnaire, and the scope of our work also involved looking at the questions from the Outlook related to GCoM's research and innovation priorities, and also that youth vision for future energy systems. And so here's just again sort of like a visual map to outline how the Outlook has organized the different regions of the world, where it's worked, and where each of the regional coordinators were also engaging with. So Paula, who you'll see in a little short video later in this presentation, she was our Latin American coordinator. And here were also just some of the partners that Student Energy had partnered up with for this energy outlook. So here's the Youth Policy Innovation team. So we're made up of a group of young people from all across the world. So as you can see, there's members from the US, South Korea, Indonesia, Zimbabwe, Bolivia, Pakistan, Canada, and China. And like Paula, some of our members were also regional coordinators themselves who worked on the outreach of the initial Outlook questionnaire and regional dialogues, and then decided to join this team to continue their work. So here comes the key part of the presentation tonight. And first of all, let's kick it off with some few key data insights. So 72.8% of youth surveyed were very concerned or moderately concerned about the pollution and emissions caused by the current global energy system. 50.9% of youth surveyed believed their government needs to invest more in fighting climate change. And then finally, 81.5% of youth surveyed believe their country or territory should have a decarbonization target for its energy system. And of those youths, 62.4% want to have a decarbonization target for 2030. So youths are wanting decarbonization targets made faster and quicker in time. They've identified governments needing to be more accountable for climate change action and have named business and industries as key players in taking more responsibility in reducing climate emissions. So as such, it's clear that youths are wanting to see change in when, who, and how global climate or clean energy challenges are addressed. And so drawing on from the data, we now would like to share these 4 sort of key areas of recommendations we've managed to extract. And in addition, we'll also be sharing some of the statistic differences noticed when comparing responses from the various participating regions. So the first recommendation is none other than to include our youth perspectives. So recall some of those key statistics that I mentioned earlier. As a whole, about 81.5% of youth respondents believe their country or territory should have a decarbonization target for its energy system, and 62.4% of the youth wanted this target to be for 2030. So to do so, we need local governments to include youth in the process to meet such targets and timelines. Local governments and cities, they play a really crucial role in carrying out local level climate action that supports holistic regional and global climate change. And as you can see on the slide here, they were named most responsible for reducing climate emissions by use in the Outlook. Data from the Outlook also suggested that cities and local governments needed to do more in their climate action plans to align with youth perspectives on decarbonization and also youth expectations on how urgently cities and communities must act. So although governments are indeed named the most important player responsible for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, youth also named businesses and industries as second most important. So cities, as centers of expertise and innovation, can invest in supporting businesses and greening sectors like transport, buildings, and waste management to also create jobs and support that long-term economic growth. And so while youth from every region had responded to how they believe their government needs to invest more in fighting climate change, certain regions reported to the sentiment more stronger than others, and some also reported feeling like their government had not invested at all. And of the regions that voted for their government not having invested at all were youths from Southeast Asia and Latin America and the Caribbean region. And this really highlights that need for greater actions in those regions. And so thinking about the global energy mix, all regions reported envisioning renewable energy to account for a significantly larger portion of the 2030 global energy mix. And so this is the global energy mix in 2018. So if you look at the renewable energy sources, it accounts for only 2%. Now, in this next slide here, you'll see this is the renewable energy mix youths want by 2030. And on average, that's nearly 20.6%. So it's a near tenfold increase to what it was back in 2018. Youth respondents in Latin America and the Caribbean in particular recorded that the largest average percentage with renewable energy should account for 31.2% of their 2030 vision of the global energy mix. And so whilst that previous area of recommendation speaks to what youths are envisioning for their future, this second recommendation dives into how governance and policy innovation is crucial to drive climate action drivers, rather than just support it. Youth feel that there is an urgent need to accelerate action led by governments for the energy transition by 2030, much earlier than most countries currently have their targets by 2050. So given the current severity of the climate crisis, one of the most powerful government actions includes development of transparent and efficient policies to effectively address climate change. Another thing, given that local governments are well positioned to drive climate action through opportunities to connect with local communities, mostly whom are impacted by climate change, it's essential that local governments also develop multiple avenues and mechanisms for greater stakeholder input and frameworks to work with other actors responsible for reducing emissions. So in terms of that avenue that I was talking about just then, based on discussions from various regional dialogues, so these were the facilitated engagement sessions between the relevant regional coordinators and other youths in the region. Youths in China had actually suggested development of large data platforms that could provide information on corporate emissions. And so these could also enable corporations to improve their accountability to meet climate commitments, or either be used as policy advocacy channels for youth and NGOs. So here's just another set of regional difference data sets. So at this stage, you might be asking, for youth, just how crucial is governance and policy innovation in climate action? Well, here are some stats for you. 8 out of the 10 regions had listed the biggest barrier as government willpower, policies, and regulations. In particular, over 50% of youths in Latin America and Caribbeans had voted for this option. And whilst this was ranked the largest barrier to sustainable energy transition globally, youth also believed that the government policies were the most important factor in driving energy transition. So 9 regions had actually ranked government policy as the most important factor, while East Asia ranked it as the second most important factor to the sustainable energy transition in 2030. So this was another question that we asked youth in the Outlook. It was to identify what priority actions businesses and industries should take for climate change action. And it was found that all regions had actually chose lobbying government on decarbonization as their top priority action. Most regions chose creating policies to reduce company emissions as their second priority action, whilst committing to becoming carbon neutral or negative as their third priority. Interestingly here, whilst East Asian youth also selected lobbying the government as their top priority, their second was actually investing in research, and third, creating policies to reduce company emissions. Again, this could potentially attribute to the region's strong reliance on non-renewable energy sources, and perhaps also reflect on how youths want more transparent and accessible research to instigate stronger sustainable energy transitions. So this bit here is where you'll be able to meet Paula via video. So I'll just play it and I'll put myself on mute so you can hear Paula a bit clearer.
Hi everyone, my name is Paula Flores. I'm from Bolivia and I'm part from the GCoM Youth Policy Innovation team. Because of the time zone, I was not able to join, but anyway, I will share some of the results since the point of view of the technological and financial innovation. So, technology and funding are crucial to the energy transition while empowering young people. According to our research, young people in Africa and East Asia selected the bubble technology and current energy industry as their biggest barriers to the sustainable energy transition. This result could indicate that young people who want to achieve the SDG 7 or in general the energy transition not only have to fight the dependence of their communities on coal, fossil fuels, but also the lack of funding and opportunities to develop their initiatives and their skills. We have previously mentioned that youth want to see an increase in renewable energy within the global mix from 2% in 2018 to 20% by 2030. On average, youth respondents want renewable energy to account for 10 times as much as it did in the 2018 global energy mix. But what does it mean for the principal decision makers such as governments? This means governments must develop policies that will promote and finance renewable energy as an advantage for the energy development of their country or territory. And for sure, there is the gap that will be reached by research and investigation. And this is the youth vision in the construction of renewable energy plans within the youth priorities and timelines in how the energy future in a country or territory should look like. Investing in fighting climate change is a key tool for the future of our planet. But truly what is happening now after the pandemic is controversial because there has been a change in the investment agendas of the countries. But also from our research, 50% of youth believe their country has not invested enough in climate change. While youth across all regions said we need to invest more as their top response. The second most common responses were divided between those who were satisfied with current investments versus those who believe their government has not invested at all. And this was clear in Latin America and Southeast Asia, where the two regions that felt no investment has made at all, highlighting the need for the greater action in these regions. Government investment in these regions seems to be slower or weaker in comparison to other regions, potentially due to the widespread perceptions that renewable energy is more expensive on many more facts. In addition, female participants voted 12% more for we need to invest more than male participants and 7% less for I am satisfied with investment. And it is interesting to observe this gender difference, which suggests that female youth want more ambitious and effective funding for climate action with real results. Funding the transition is a great challenge for all the stakeholders, and how to fund it has been a large question for many decision makers. According to the Outlook and our research, 46.2% of the youth respondents choose taxing the production of emissions, where companies that produce emissions could pay this tax as their preferred way of funding the transition to net zero carbon emissions. This alternative was also highly reinforced by Latin American youth people who said that taxing the production of emissions account for over 55% of youth. This brings up the idea of creating carbon markets as a potential mechanism for taxing emissions. However, the challenges associated with these include a lack of transparency and uncertainty about their effectiveness as a real solution for the energy transition. Because of the social, economic, technical issues that carbon markets could bring to society if they are not developed efficiently and effectively. As a result, there is a clear necessity to complement carbon markets with other policies that will support climate action. Local governments should incorporate the cost of carbon on people and the planet in investment decisions and apply carbon markets as an initial first step for climate action. This should be done in conjunction with developing a specific laws that will hold companies accountable for paying their emissions, as well as for having clear emission targets, timelines, and roadmaps to decarbonize their operations. This needs to be completed by the development of clear government agendas in how they will use these taxes in the support of other energy priorities in their countries or territories. This is a special call to governments to have transparent structures when implementing carbon markets actions in the future. Also, we identified that local governments should realize the potential of youth innovation in technological advancements by funding and developing youth entrepreneurship and research. This involves supporting startup incubator and accelerator programs and created team investment calls such as grants or business competitions and hackathons. Also, local research must put youth at the forefront of research and expand participation for young people in research and developing initiatives to improve the availability of technology. And also this can be supported by the development of research plans in energy innovation, where different stakeholders like academia, governments, and young people could work together. This is especially important in East Asia and Africa, where youth respondents identify a valuable technology and the current energy industry as barriers to the energy transition. The youth team believe there are also a number of ways for cities to engage with young people on technical innovation and to fund their work. Thus investing in city-level climate actions. Also, local governments should create initiatives and investments and incentives and systems to compensate young people for their work on the energy transition and to welcome more young people from diverse backgrounds into the energy and climate spaces. This includes partnering with local organizations to create green job programs, develop free educational programs for students interested in learning about sustainability, and fund green infrastructure projects that will ultimately create more opportunities for young people, and this could help make these opportunities more accessible to youth who usually do not participate due to financial constraints. So it means there is a huge, I would say, that agenda for all governments, including the local level, to include the youth voices into the different spaces that they have, while empowering the different skills that are needed to work with them in these spaces. Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Paula Flores. I'm from Bolivia.
So that was Paula on our third area of recommendation. So this is the last key area of recommendation, which is social innovation. So it was noted from the Outlook that nearly 39% of youth respondents globally feel that there are meaningful opportunities for youth to work on sustainable energy issues directly with policymakers in their country or territory. Young people often feel discouraged by harsh top-down governance that do not adequately include local communities in the process. And as a result, we must abide by that concept of nothing about us, without us, where young people are engaged within climate action and policy development processes through co-design and co-production of knowledge. Local government are also best positioned to work with young people as the closest level of governance to community groups and can strongly tap into the young innovation and commitment to climate action. This can also include holding youth councils, working groups, and democratic frameworks where young people are connected and included as decision makers on climate change and energy policies. Secondly, the Outlook also finds that 13.3% of youth respondents globally found public or community support as the biggest barrier to achieving sustainable energy transition in their country or territory. In regional dialogue sessions hosted by the regional coordinators, some of the youths had mentioned that their knowledge on climate change and climate action mostly comes from a variety of informal sources rather than formal education systems. As such, it's critical that cities support that holistic climate education and literacy to empower all generations with the skills, knowledge, and values. Also, embedding Indigenous and local knowledge to encourage climate action is going to be increasingly important. Further, climate education can extend beyond the school grounds, and through training within institutions and workplaces, also taps into multiple tracks and specializations and supports a wide range of activities, including entrepreneurship, policy and advocacy, climate economics, and finance. And last but not least, having open source data can bridge that knowledge gap associated with low community support. Datasets are hugely vital to contributing and supporting local technological and social innovation. And there is an opportunity for cities to further collect data on young people and their perspectives that can support such local innovation. So statistic-wise, it was found that the government's role in climate change action was also identified as having the most responsibility in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This was followed by business and industries, And so, as mentioned before, this was also mentioned before earlier in the slides, but the brief regional difference that I thought I would highlight here specifically was that in Southeast Asia, as you can see, they ranked families, neighborhoods, and communities as third most responsible. So this just goes to show how youth consider bottom-up approaches to be important in reducing emissions, and also acknowledges the significance that citizenship engagement has in shaping stronger and resilient sustainable energy transitions at the local level. So to summarize, here are just some of the key takeaways. So local governments need to create the enabling environment for climate and clean energy action. Young people identified government policy and willpower as the biggest barrier in the energy transition. Young people see a path forward. They are hopeful about the opportunity to participate in the transition. A quarter of young people believe there are meaningful opportunities to work with policymakers on the energy transition, as well as with businesses, but need that support to see a path forward and feel like their perspectives are valued. Finally, young people believe industry plays a huge role in funding the transition, as respondents believe that companies that are producing emissions need to be the ones to contribute taxes on those emissions. Industry needs to demonstrate leadership on decarbonization by actively advocating for emissions reductions internally and with governance. So what's next? Well, we currently have a final report that's in the making and should be published soon. I believe this will also be made available on the Student Energies website. Otherwise, really, this outlook has brought us valuable insight into the perspectives of youths across regions and countries. And whilst it may be the first, we are definitely sure it won't be the last. Finally, we want to see these recommendations come into fruition and see how it can not just support youth in climate action, but bring more inclusivity and accessibility for youths, and ultimately enable them to have a larger voice and part in becoming current and upcoming climate action drivers. So that's all we have for tonight. Thank you for tuning in. There are some links in the corner of this slide if you'd like to read more information about the Outlook or any of the organizations. I'm also happy to pop them in the chat, Peter. But otherwise, I have a slide for discussions or questions if anyone has any.
Great, thanks very much. That's a fantastic presentation from both of you. And as usual, we're going to look at questions that have come up in the Q&A. Wynne is running the tech this evening, is going to moderate those, pass them back to Alison. As usual, I'll take the privilege of asking the first question. I was really heartened and I guess interested in how broad the similarity of responses were. Did you have much chance for interaction between the groups from different regions? Because I'd be interested to know how they responded to each other's views. There's been kind of this, I guess, long-standing trope that somehow concern about climate is a first world problem, that the developing world is going to be more concerned about economic development above everything else, and so on. And I'd be interested to know, firstly, just what effect these findings should have on how durable that trope turns out to be, but also on whether there was kind of surprise at how similar kind of the concerns were, differences about how things should be responded to, but the idea that this is a global problem with global buy-in seems a really strong outcome of this. And did you get any sense of how the groups themselves thought about that global response?
Yeah, so unfortunately, this question would have been great for Paula because she was also one of the regional coordinators. I joined as just a simple member, so I unfortunately didn't host any of the regional dialogues myself, but just sort of drawing on from just like sort of internal discussions that we've had within the youth policy team, there were bits that we were definitely surprised by, but again, similarly, there were also bits that it couldn't have been said better than with the statistics that we got. For example, I remember in one of the discussions that we had, like just looking at the amount of people that had responded that they wanted to see, you know, their governments in action, or sort of just like responding that their governments hadn't responded or invested at all in climate energy transitions. Those were really sort of like painful to see, because unfortunately, as someone who is a young person myself, governments really are to us sort of like that sort of like key aspect in trying to gain more traction on climate change action. But unfortunately, it's just sometimes, and you'll see this on the news as well from time to time, depending on which region you are at. But you know, sometimes governments do tend to do more of the wording rather than the actions, and that's sort of like a key thing that I think has definitely come out from this outlook here, is that we don't really want to stop at words anymore. Words is already quite enough. We've had enough. We really want to see more action come through instead, and that action we want to be a part of, but also at points in time be able to lead those actions as well.
Yep, great. At this point, I'll step out of the way and hand back to Wynne to see if there are questions in the Q&A that we'll promote. And the form that this will take is Wynne will have a look at a question and ask the person who's posed the question in the Q&A if they'd like to unmute themselves and ask it directly. Otherwise, Wynne can read the question out and Alison can respond.
Right, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Alison, for the beautiful seminars and very insightful statistics. There's a question from Siva Narayanand. Siva, would you like to direct your questions in person to Alison? I can unmute you if you like. Or I can call it out right now. So when the final report is released, would they be presented to government leadership to help them identify the top few recommendations to focus in their 4 years plan?
Yeah, so as you can tell, the report really spans across different regions. So at the moment, from what I know, Student Energy is working with GCoM to see if the information from this outlook, as well as the final report, can actually be disseminated through to different governments across the different regions, but also, I guess, trying to see if there are any sort of other partnerships or programs and things like that that youth can be involved in those relevant regions. So that's what I've heard from so far. So yeah, but definitely, like I mentioned before, it's not going to be the last thing that happens on the agenda. And hopefully this social data set also opens up more pathways to how youth can actually be engaged and be leading those actions as well.
Following on to that, there's a question from Haida Rocha. Do you know about the software that models or shows data, energy and water figures for business focusing in net zero?
So I think on Student Energy's website, there's actually, I think they've created a little model that does that. I unfortunately wasn't involved in that, so I don't have too much data on it. But yeah, if you head on to Student Energy's website, I believe they've done a lot of different things in terms of energy transitions, and one of them being, I believe, water. I could be wrong, it could be something else, but definitely have a browse through Student Energy's website to have a see. They have a lot of great information and data sets that's all been done by youths as part of the Student Energy chapters, or even youth researchers and staff part of that organization as well. But in terms of anything that's not Student Energy, unfortunately, that might be outside of my knowledge area, so can't answer anything beyond that. So yes, sorry about that, Hader, but hopefully you find something useful on the Student Energy website. I can actually pop through to the slide before, so I can copy the links for everyone in the Zoom chat. Might have to throw it through to Wynne to pass it on to the rest of the attendees in the event.
Right. So another question from Siva Narayanan. And would you like to direct your questions to Alison? If not, I can call that out again. So the questions regarding SMEs and large enterprises, would there be a separate set of recommendations for state and federal governments and another couple of recommendations for SMEs and large enterprises?
So in terms of separate set of recommendations, I believe you're just referring to this outlook. In this case, at the moment, the report I know of is going to be distributed to mostly local governments. I'm not sure if there are plans to go beyond local, but I'm sure there is opportunities to do that. But in terms of saying, just from my personal perspective as well, there are definitely avenues in trying to sort of create separate recommendations for what local governments and state governments can do, because one, in terms of the capacity of their action, it's definitely different, even though some aspects might be quite similar or the same. And again, in terms of interacting with governments as a youth, it is definitely easier to go via the avenue of local government and then potentially going up the hierarchy, going up to state or national. But again, it could depend on what region or country, what sort of government programs or even other businesses or industry programs that are occurring there, and how they interact with the youth or have included youths in terms of their actions and action plans.
The questions from Mr. Neil Marshman. Neil, would you like to direct your questions to Alison? I can unmute you if you like. But it is in regards of your statistics. Is your data comparable reference data for the communities at large? You know, just rather than just being in a smaller group for youth.
Yeah, so in terms of reference data, the regional dialogues would probably be something great to kind of reflect, I guess, like a smaller data set. So I'm not too sure if that's being released, but if it is, it will definitely be published on the Student Energy's website. But apart from that, just thinking in terms of a Victorian or like Melbourne base, obviously just going via local government channels is definitely one thing to do. And even if you don't identify yourself as a young person or a youth, it's still I believe it's still a great channel, especially if you don't have access to, I guess, sort of like the academic side of things or data sets. Though the local governments are always a great way to kind of engage with as someone who's from like a local or public community. But given that there are tons and tons of data sets out there on the internet, and I just wish that there was one way that we could sort of like assemble them all into the one page so it's accessible to anyone and everyone across different regions and worlds. So maybe that might happen in the future. I'm not too sure, but yeah, I definitely see what you can do as an individual. As starters is probably something I would go forth with, and then definitely approach, peers. Even events like this is probably a great way to get access to information. So moving on from like individual action to collaborative action is definitely also something to consider in terms of climate action as well.
That is,
I think I can see a note in the chat. Yeah, I can definitely share some of the information if I can find it. I'm happy to send it through to Climate Energy College and see if that can be shared across the attendees tonight.
Yeah, please visit our website, Climate Energy College, UniMel. The link is above.
And we can certainly make sure that information kind of like links to other reports and the Student Energy website and so on will go up on the event page where you originally found the talk. So we'll make sure that that's linked in. Cool. If there's no other questions, I've kind of got one more question if I can.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's kind of regarding this question of how included people feel in the transition. Is there a sense, you commented on the fact that people see that the young people see a way forward, which is, I suspect that is different from 10 years ago. I suspect if we'd done this survey 10 years ago, people might well have felt very concerned, but completely blocked as to how something could happen. But I'm interested in how kind of whether people see an individual pathway. How can I, and I guess it's looking at people like Thunberg. How do people see the role models and the way youth has taken leadership as empowering, as something that they can aspire to? Is there much of a sense that yes, we're the collective that can actually help get humanity through this problem? Are you getting much sense of a kind of organized collective drive to respond, or is this is what we need to do, but we're not quite sure how to do it?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good question. I think for starters, it's always best to stay positive, regardless of how severe the situation is. And unfortunately, I don't think there is a way back, which is why we definitely have to, keep moving forward. And in terms of that, I guess, individual scale versus collective scale, ultimately, there is only so much you can do as an individual, which I personally would advocate for do as much as you can as an individual. There are differing scales of how much you can do in terms of your capacity, but also just how much you can afford to be able to do within your region. And so translating all of that individual action through to a collective sort of collaborative approach means that you get to meet individuals who may not necessarily have the same capacity as you, but most likely will have and share that same passion and goal in sort of transitioning through to a more sustainable climate future. And so by combining, different sets of capacities, skills, knowledge, you get a whole movement of people being able to contribute to something much larger in a bigger set of focus as well. And so yeah, it's definitely, I think, something worth considering because a lot of the times you might hear people say, uh, look at what Greta might be doing. She's doing great things, but I feel like it's not just about observing anymore. It's time to kind of step in and do things as much as you can yourself. So yeah, definitely rolling from individual to that collective aspect is, I guess, quite key in this instance, and especially in terms of intergenerationality, trying to get knowledge as well as awareness from different age, different genders, different sort of like appreciating that diversity of knowledge that we currently already have, and trying to move on to make sure that that diversity is still tapped into, but also flourishing that even more in the future is again something that I feel like would be quite important in terms of sustainable climate action.
Yeah, I think I might even be stronger than that, but we don't know yet how this is going to play out. But I suspect if we get through this well, that we might well look back on the previous 3 or 4 years when the world's students kind of put this problem over the top, if you like, that suddenly it switched from being something that was out there to something that people we knew really well were getting involved in and people were related to. And I think something in the alignment of social and political and probably economic forces as well meant that had a huge impact. And so I would really encourage people to stay with this, because it looks as though this is turning out to be a very strong avenue for change.
Yes, please do stay with us. And yeah, definitely, I feel like collaborating and learning and just trying to, I guess, charge through the unknown together. That's probably something that we all need to kind of be able to do in order to move forward positively, and I guess in the sense a lot more greener as well.
Cool. Any other questions out there on the chat or the Q&A?
Nope.
If not, I'm going to, before wrapping up, firstly to thank Alison and indirectly Paula a lot for, I think, a really important presentation that I guess keeps convincing me of how broad the push is for actually getting this problem done, getting this problem fixed. That it's not particularly regional and it's not particularly academic anymore. That there's a very broad drive to get this done, and that's particularly germane, particularly relevant to the people who are going to have to shoulder the problem. And that is perhaps not the fairest response it could be. It should perhaps be the people who've been causing the problem that should be responding more. But nonetheless, leadership has to come from somewhere. And this is clearly a major spring of energy and leadership for solving this problem. The other comment I want to make is just to segue into our next couple of seminars in the next week. Alison mentioned a couple of times the kind of important role that the proximity of local government can have in facilitating action. And it turns out that next week, we're going to be talking quite a bit about cities, about how the information that's available around cities can help them develop better monitoring of what emissions are doing in their region and kind of the effective actions they can take, and just how the kind of research agenda around cities, what do cities actually need to do to respond both to drive reductions in emissions in cities and to adapt to the change that's already baked in that we're going to have to live with. So it's a kind of very much the city's focus next time, which is quite a natural follow-on from what Alison was commenting on about the importance of local government and local pathways to the problem. So invite everyone to keep in contact with the website as the seminar notifications keep coming up. We have a busy few weeks ahead of us with our major wrap-up event coming in the next few weeks as well. We will kind of try and draw together the threads of a whole series of activities we've been involved in over the last year or so. So thanks very much again, Alison and Paula, and I think we'll close it from here.
Thanks for having us.